The lash came down hard across Clara Lawton's back for the 5th time, and she bit through her bottom lip to keep from screaming in front of the gathered crowd in Fort Collins, Colorado's dusty main square. Blood soaked through the thin cotton of her dress, staining it dark crimson as Pastor Whitmore read from his list of her sins with righteous fury, his voice carrying across the silent onlookers in the late summer heat of 1878. "This woman stands accused of corrupting her mind with forbidden literature," he bellowed, holding up a copy of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry and Mary Wollstonecraft's writings like they were instruments of the devil himself. "She has defied the natural order established by God and man, filling her head with dangerous ideas that have no place in a decent Christian community." The 6th lash struck, and Clara's knees buckled. She hung from the wooden post in the center of the square, her wrists bound with rough rope that had already rubbed her skin raw. 23 years old, unmarried, and living alone since her parents died of cholera 2 years prior, she had made herself a target by refusing to conform to the expectations of the tight-knit frontier town. Her crime was simple. She had been caught reading books deemed inappropriate for women by the town council, which was controlled entirely by Pastor Whitmore and his circle of stern-faced elders. From the edge of the crowd, Marcus Zimmerman watched with growing fury, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. He had ridden into Fort Collins just that morning, a drifter cowboy looking for temporary work at one of the nearby ranches. At 26, he had seen his share of injustice across the territories, but something about the sight of this woman being publicly brutalized for the crime of reading made his blood boil in a way he had not experienced before. The 7th lash fell, and this time Clara could not contain her cry of pain. The sound cut through Marcus like a knife, and before he fully realized what he was doing, his hand had moved to his holster. The weight of his Colt revolver felt reassuring against his palm, but he forced himself to stay still. Starting a gunfight in the middle of town would only get them both killed, and it would not help her at all. "Let this be a lesson to all women who think themselves above their proper station," Pastor Whitmore continued, his face flushed with zealous conviction. "The female mind is weak and easily corrupted. It is our duty as men to protect them from themselves, even if we must use harsh measures." The 8th lash came down, and Marcus turned away, unable to watch any longer. He moved through the crowd with deliberate steps, heading toward the general store at the far end of the street. His mind was already working on a plan, though the details were still forming. He knew where Clara lived because he had overheard 2 women whispering about her earlier, their voices full of scandalized disapproval. They had called her a spinster, a woman who thought herself too good for honest work as a wife and mother. By the time the 10th and final lash fell, Marcus had purchased medical supplies from the store, clean bandages, carbolic acid for disinfecting wounds, and a tin of salve that the shopkeeper swore would prevent scarring. He also bought something else, something that made the elderly shopkeeper raise his eyebrows in surprise. But the man said nothing as he wrapped the package carefully in brown paper. Clara was cut down from the post as the crowd began to disperse, most people returning to their daily business as though they had not just witnessed a brutal flogging. 2 women from the church helped carry her to her small cabin at the edge of town, depositing her face down on her bed before leaving without a word. The message was clear. She was being helped only because Christian duty demanded it, not out of any real compassion. Night fell slowly over Fort Collins, the summer sun taking its time to sink behind the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Clara lay in her bed, burning with fever and pain, too hurt to even reach for the water pitcher on her nightstand. Every breath felt like fire across her shredded back, and she drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes thinking she heard her mother's voice calling to her from somewhere far away. She did not hear the gentle knock at her door, or the sound of it opening when no answer came. She did not notice the tall figure that stepped inside, moving quietly across her small cabin until he stood beside her bed. It was only when she felt cool water against her cracked lips that her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring up at a stranger's face. "Easy now," Marcus said softly, helping her take small sips from a tin cup. "I am not going to hurt you. I am here to help." Clara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry and raw from screaming. She managed only a small sound, something between a whimper and a question. "My name is Marcus Zimmerman," he said, setting the cup aside. "I saw what they did to you today. I have medical supplies and I know how to tend wounds like these. Will you let me help you?" She should have been afraid. She should have protested having a strange man in her home, alone with her at night. But something in his eyes, a genuine kindness she had not seen in Fort Collins for longer than she could remember, made her nod weakly in agreement. Marcus worked with practiced efficiency, his hands gentle despite their obvious strength. He had learned field medicine during his years working cattle drives, where injuries were common and doctors were scarce. He carefully cut away what remained of her ruined dress, averting his eyes from anything except her wounded back. The sight of the damage made him curse under his breath. Deep gashes crisscrossed her pale skin, some still bleeding sluggishly. "This is going to hurt," he warned before applying the carbolic acid. Clara bit down on the leather belt he offered her, her body going rigid as the disinfectant burned through the open wounds. Tears streamed down her face, soaking into her pillow, but she made no sound. Marcus worked as quickly as he could, cleaning each wound thoroughly before applying the salve, and then wrapping her torso in clean white bandages. When he finished, he covered her with a clean blanket and sat back in the chair beside her bed, exhausted from the careful work. Clara had passed out from the pain, which was probably for the best. He took the opportunity to look around her cabin, seeing it properly for the first time in the lamplight. Books were everywhere. They lined shelves made from rough planks, stacked on her small table, piled beside her rocking chair near the fireplace. Poetry, philosophy, novels, scientific treatises, anything she had been able to get her hands on despite the town's restrictions. Marcus stood and moved to examine them more closely, running his fingers along their worn spines. Many were old, probably inherited from her parents. Others looked newer, and he wondered how she had managed to acquire them in a town so hostile to female education. He picked up a volume of Whitman's Leaves of Grass and smiled slightly. This book, too, had been banned in many places, deemed too scandalous and free-thinking for polite society. Marcus himself had a copy somewhere in his saddlebags, given to him by a former lover in Kansas City, who had taught him that there was more to life than just surviving day to day. A soft sound made him turn. Clara had woken again, her eyes following him as he stood by her bookshelf. "You can read," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus returned to her bedside, still holding the Whitman. "Yes, madam. My mother was a schoolteacher back in Missouri before the war. She made sure I could read and write before she passed." "Most cowboys cannot," Clara said, and there was no judgment in her tone, only observation. "Most cowboys did not have a schoolteacher for a mother," Marcus replied with a slight smile. He held up the book. "This is dangerous material, according to most folks." "All the best books are," Clara managed, and despite her pain, there was a spark of defiance in her green eyes that made Marcus's heart skip unexpectedly. He sat down again, placing the book on the table beside her bed. From his coat pocket, he withdrew the brown paper package he had bought at the general store. "I brought you something. A gift, I suppose, though we have only just met." Clara's eyes widened as he unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound copy of Jane Eyre. It was well made, with gilt edges and a crimson ribbon bookmark. Such a book would have cost him nearly a week's wages. "I cannot accept that," she whispered, though her gaze lingered hungrily on the volume. "You do not even know me. Why would you do this?" Marcus was silent for a moment, considering his answer. "Because what they did to you today was wrong. Because no one should be punished for wanting to learn, to think, to grow beyond the narrow confines others try to force upon them." He paused, then added more quietly, "Because when I was younger, my sister was beaten by our father for teaching herself to read from my mother's books after mother died. She ran away at 15, and I never saw her again. I have always wondered if I could have done more to protect her." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes, and this time they were not from physical pain. "I am sorry," she said softly. "Do not be sorry for something that was not your fault," Marcus said firmly. He placed the book on the table beside her water pitcher. "Rest now. I will stay nearby tonight, just to make sure your fever does not get worse. In the morning, I will bring you food and check your bandages." "They will not like you helping me," Clara warned. "The pastor and his followers, they have eyes everywhere in this town. If they see you coming here, they will cause trouble for you too." Marcus shrugged, his expression hardening. "Let them try. I have dealt with worse than small-town religious bullies." True to his word, Marcus stayed through the night, dozing in the chair while monitoring Clara's condition. When her fever spiked near dawn, he cooled her burning skin with wet cloths, murmuring reassurances when she became delirious and called out for her mother. As the sun rose over the Colorado plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara finally fell into a deeper, more restful sleep. Marcus left briefly to tend to his horse and find food, returning with fresh bread, cheese, and eggs from the boarding house where he had taken a room. The landlady had given him suspicious looks when he asked for extra portions, but had said nothing. When Clara woke late that morning, he helped her sit up carefully and fed her small bites, patient when she could manage only a little before exhaustion claimed her again. The days fell into a pattern. Marcus would arrive early each morning before most of the town was awake and let himself in quietly. He would change Clara's bandages, clean her wounds, bring her food and fresh water. As she gradually regained her strength, they began to talk, really talk, in ways that neither of them had experienced with another person in years. Clara told him about her parents, both educated people from Boston who had come west with dreams of starting a school on the frontier. They had died before that dream could be realized, leaving Clara alone with only their books and their belief that knowledge was the greatest gift anyone could possess. She had tried to honor their memory by continuing to read and learn, even as the town grew more conservative under Pastor Whitmore's influence. Marcus shared his own story. Growing up in Missouri, losing his mother to pneumonia when he was 12, watching helplessly as his father became bitter and cruel in his grief. His sister, Sarah's disappearance when Marcus was 17. The way he had left home shortly after, unable to bear living under his father's roof any longer. The years of drifting from town to town, ranch to ranch, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots or form lasting connections. Why not? Clara asked one afternoon, nearly a week after the flogging. She was sitting up now, able to move more easily though her back still pained her greatly. The wounds were healing clean, thanks to Marcus's careful tending, but she would bear the scars forever. Marcus was sitting in the rocking chair, reading aloud from Jane Eyre at Clara's request. He paused, considering the question. "I suppose I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I cared about a place or people too much, I would lose them the way I lost my mother and Sarah. It seemed safer to keep moving, to never let anyone matter enough to hurt me." "That sounds lonely," Clara said quietly. "It was," Marcus agreed, meeting her eyes. "It is." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Both of them had been alone for so long, protecting themselves from further pain by refusing to let anyone get close. But somehow, in the aftermath of violence and injustice, they had found each other, and the walls they had built around their hearts were beginning to crack. As Clara's strength returned, Marcus began bringing her more books. He would ride to the larger town of Greeley, 15 miles south, where the general store had a more extensive selection and fewer questions about who was buying what. He brought her novels by the Bronte sisters, poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Christina Rossetti, essays by Emerson and Thoreau. Each new volume made Clara's eyes light up with joy, and Marcus found himself looking forward to her reactions almost as much as she looked forward to the books themselves. They read together in the evenings, Marcus in the rocking chair and Clara propped up carefully on her bed, surrounded by pillows. Sometimes they would discuss what they had read, debating ideas and interpretations long into the night. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own book, but taking comfort in the other's presence. It was during one of these quiet evenings, nearly 3 weeks after the flogging, that Clara looked up from her book and found Marcus watching her with an expression she could not quite name. Her breath caught in her throat, and suddenly the small cabin felt even smaller, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the approaching thunderstorm she could hear rumbling in the distance. "What is it?" she asked softly. Marcus set his book aside and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Clara, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you respond." She nodded, closing her own book and giving him her full attention. "I came to Fort Collins planning to stay maybe a week, earn enough money for supplies, and then move on like I always do," Marcus said, his voice low and intense. "But then I saw what they did to you, and something changed. These past few weeks, taking care of you, talking with you, learning who you are, it has made me realize something I have been running from for years." "What is that?" Clara whispered, her heart pounding. "I do not want to be alone anymore," Marcus said simply. "I do not want to keep drifting from place to place with no real purpose, and I sure as hell do not want to leave Fort Collins if it means leaving you behind." Clara felt her eyes filling with tears. "Marcus, you barely know me. I know that you are brave enough to defy an entire town for the right to think for yourself," he said firmly. "I know that you are kind, despite the cruelty others have shown you. I know that you have a beautiful mind and a passionate heart, and that talking with you these past weeks has made me happier than I have been in years." He paused, then added more quietly, "I know that I am falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than anything else I have ever faced." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and utterly transformative. Clara stared at him, this cowboy who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was saying. He had shown her kindness when the rest of the world showed only judgment. He had tended her wounds with gentle hands and fed her hungry mind with forbidden books. He had sat with her through fever and pain, asking nothing in return. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. And suddenly she was crying in earnest, tears streaming down her face as Marcus crossed the small space between them in 2 long strides. He sat carefully on the edge of her bed and pulled her into his arms, mindful of her still healing back. Clara buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, leather and sage and something uniquely Marcus. "We will figure this out," he murmured against her hair. "I promise you, Clara, I will not let anyone hurt you again." Their first kiss happened 3 days later, soft and tentative and sweet as honey. Clara had been well enough to sit outside on her small porch, enjoying the late September sunshine while Marcus worked on repairing her chicken coop, which had fallen into disrepair during her convalescence. She watched him work, admiring the easy strength of his movements, the way the sun caught the gold highlights in his brown hair. When he finished and came to sit beside her, she turned to thank him and found herself caught by the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and rare. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Marcus froze for a heartbeat, surprised, and then his hand came up to cup her cheek gently as he kissed her back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted with a shaky laugh. "What took you so long?" Clara teased, her own laughter bright and free in a way it had not been in months. "I was trying to be a gentleman," Marcus said. "I did not want you to think I had ulterior motives for helping you." Clara pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. "Marcus Zimmerman, if I thought you had ulterior motives, I never would have let you through my door in the first place. I trust you, completely." Those words meant more to Marcus than any declaration of love. Trust was not given lightly, especially not by someone who had been betrayed and brutalized by the people who should have protected her. He kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring all his feelings into the connection between them. But their happiness existed in a fragile bubble, and they both knew it could not last. Fort Collins was a small town with long memories and strong opinions about propriety. The fact that Marcus had been seen entering and leaving Clara's cabin regularly had not gone unnoticed, and soon the whispers began. It was Pastor Whitmore himself who came calling one cold October morning, accompanied by 3 of his most loyal followers. Marcus answered the door, his expression hard and unyielding as he blocked the entrance with his body. "We need to speak with Miss Lawton," the pastor said, his voice dripping with false concern. "It has come to our attention that she has been entertaining a man in her home, unchaperoned. Such behavior is unseemly and cannot be tolerated in a God-fearing community. Clara has been recovering from injuries your people inflicted on her," Marcus said coldly. "I have been providing medical care. There is nothing unseemly about it." "That is a matter of interpretation," Pastor Whitmore replied, his eyes narrowing. "Regardless, we have a responsibility to uphold the moral standards of this town. Miss Lawton must submit to an examination by the church women to ensure her virtue remains intact, or she will be asked to leave Fort Collins." Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. "You will not lay a hand on her. Not now, not ever again." "Then she must leave," the pastor said flatly. "Unless, of course, you intend to make an honest woman of her. Marriage would solve this problem quite neatly, though I question whether a drifter cowboy is a suitable match for any woman, even one as fallen as Miss Lawton." Before Marcus could respond with the violence that was singing in his veins, Clara's voice came from behind him. "We will marry." Marcus turned to find her standing in the doorway between her bedroom and the main room, dressed in a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back from her face. She looked pale but determined, her chin lifted in defiance. "Clara, you do not have to do this," Marcus said urgently. "We can leave, go somewhere else." "And give them the satisfaction of driving me from my home," Clara said, her eyes flashing. "No. My parents built this cabin with their own hands. They are buried in the cemetery here. I will not abandon them or their memory because of narrow-minded fools." She looked past Marcus to Pastor Whitmore. "We will marry, but not in your church. And you will leave us alone from this day forward, or I will write to every newspaper from here to Denver about what you did to me and why. I may be just one woman, but I promise you, there are people who will listen, and you will not like the attention it brings to your town." Pastor Whitmore's face turned red with anger, but after a long, tense moment, he nodded curtly. "Very well, but the wedding must happen within the week, or you will both be driven out." After they left, Clara sagged against the doorframe and Marcus caught her, helping her to a chair. "Are you all right?" he asked worriedly. "I am fine," Clara said, though her hands were shaking. "Marcus, I am sorry. I should have discussed this with you first. I have trapped you into marriage." Marcus knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Clara, listen to me. You have not trapped me into anything. The only thing I regret is that I did not ask you properly, with the romance and ceremony you deserve." He paused, then continued with utter sincerity. "I want to marry you, not because some self-righteous pastor demands it, but because I love you. Because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Because when I think about the future, the only thing I see clearly is you beside me." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks again, but this time they were tears of joy. "Are you asking me to marry you, Marcus Zimmerman?" "I am," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Clara Lawton, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, bringing you every forbidden book I can find?" Clara laughed through her tears, a sound of pure happiness. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 5 days later in Clara's cabin, with only the justice of peace and his wife as witnesses. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Marcus wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. He had sold his saddle to buy her a simple gold ring, and when he slid it onto her finger, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a benediction. The justice of peace pronounced them husband and wife, and Marcus kissed his bride with a tenderness that made the older woman dab at her eyes with her handkerchief. After the couple signed the marriage certificate and the witnesses left, Marcus and Clara stood in the middle of the small cabin that was now truly theirs, holding each other close. "What do we do now?" Clara asked softly. "Now we build a life together," Marcus said. "A real life, not just surviving but actually living." Marcus found work at a ranch 10 miles outside of Fort Collins, honest work with good pay. The ranch owner, a weathered man named Thompson who had no patience for the town's religious politics, was happy to hire someone with Marcus's skills. Marcus proved himself quickly, demonstrating not only his ability with horses and cattle, but also an unexpected head for the business side of ranching. Within a year, Thompson made Marcus his foreman, with a salary that allowed him and Clara to improve their small cabin, and even buy the land it sat on, ensuring no one could ever drive Clara from her home again. Clara, for her part, quietly began teaching reading and arithmetic to the ranch hands' children, and then to the ranch hands themselves who had never learned their letters. Word spread, and soon she had students coming from neighboring ranches as well. She charged nothing for her services, payment coming instead in the form of eggs, vegetables, or occasionally a book ordered from Denver or even as far as Chicago. Pastor Whitmore fumed about this development but could do nothing. The ranchers respected education even if the townspeople did not, and they protected Clara from interference. 2 years after their wedding, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Marcus was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, his protective instincts going into overdrive. He baby-proofed their cabin, which had been expanded with 2 additional rooms, and worried constantly about Clara's health and safety. I am pregnant, not fragile, Clara reminded him with exasperated affection when he tried to insist she stop teaching during her 8th month. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time, Marcus. I will be fine. She was right. In the spring of 1881, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's brown hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Marcus's grandfather, a man Marcus remembered as kind and gentle despite the hardships of his life. Holding his son for the first time, Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. All the years of drifting, of keeping himself apart from real connection, seemed like a distant dream. This was what mattered. This tiny life he and Clara had created together. This family they were building from love and shared values and mutual respect. Clara watched her husband cradle their infant son, saw the tears streaming unashamedly down his face, and felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. "We did good," she said softly. "We did perfect," Marcus corrected, looking up at her with such adoration that Clara felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the cabin became even more crowded with books. Marcus continued his tradition of bringing Clara new volumes, but now he also brought picture books and fairy tales for their son. Samuel's first word was book, which made both his parents laugh with delight. The town of Fort Collins slowly changed around them. Pastor Whitmore died of a heart attack in 1883, and his replacement was a younger, more moderate man who believed in education for all. The town began to grow, attracting new settlers with more progressive views. Clara's informal school became more accepted, even respected, and she found herself with more students than she could reasonably teach alone. Marcus helped her build a proper schoolhouse on their property, using money they had saved carefully over the years. It was a simple building, just one room with a wood stove and rows of benches, but to Clara it represented a dream fulfilled. Her parents had wanted to build a school on the frontier, and now, through her, they had. On the day the schoolhouse opened in the fall of 1884, Marcus stood with 4-year-old Samuel in his arms, watching Clara teach her first official class of 20 students ranging from 6 years old to 60. His son pointed at his mother and said proudly, "That is Mama. She is the smartest person in the world." "You are absolutely right," Marcus agreed, his voice thick with emotion. That evening, after the students had gone home and Samuel was tucked into bed, Clara and Marcus sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Marcus had his arm around his wife and she leaned into his strength, feeling utterly content. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Staying here, tying yourself to one place to me." Marcus turned to look at her, his expression incredulous. "Regret it? Clara, marrying you and building this life with you is the only thing I have never regretted for even a moment. Before you, I was just existing, moving from place to place with no purpose. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home." Clara kissed him softly. "You saved my life, you know. If you had not helped me that night, I do not know what would have happened to me." "You saved mine too," Marcus said seriously. "Maybe not in the same dramatic way, but just as surely. You taught me that it is possible to be happy, to build something lasting, to love without fear of loss. Those are gifts I can never repay." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear Samuel talking in his sleep, probably dreaming about the adventure story Marcus had read to him before bed. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the wind carried the scent of sage and pine. "I want another baby," Clara said suddenly. Marcus looked at her in surprise, then grinned. "Yeah, yes," Clara said firmly. Samuel needs a sibling, and I want our house to be full of children and laughter. I want to give them the kind of childhood I had, full of books and ideas and parents who love them unconditionally." "Then we will give them exactly that," Marcus promised, kissing her forehead. "As many as you want." Their daughter was born in the summer of 1885, a tiny thing with a surprisingly loud cry and a head full of dark curls. They named her Sarah, after Marcus's lost sister, and Marcus wept when Clara told him the name she had chosen. "Maybe wherever she is, she knows she is remembered," Clara said gently, placing baby Sarah in her father's arms. "Maybe she found her own happiness the way we found ours." Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from changing her diapers to singing her lullabies. At 5 years old, he was already showing signs of his mother's intelligence and his father's steady temperament. He had started learning to read, devouring every book Clara put in front of him with voracious appetite. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Marcus continued working at the Thompson Ranch, eventually becoming a partner in the operation when Thompson's own sons showed no interest in ranching. The ranch prospered under Marcus's management, and the family's financial security improved dramatically. Clara's school grew as well, and she hired 2 assistant teachers to help manage the increasing number of students. By 1888, 10 years after that terrible day in the town square, Fort Collins had transformed into a genuine town with a railway connection and increasing prosperity. The old rigid attitudes that had nearly destroyed Clara were fading, replaced by a more cosmopolitan worldview brought by new settlers from the East and even from Europe. One autumn afternoon, Clara was teaching when a woman appeared at the schoolhouse door, travel-worn and hesitant. She was perhaps 40 years old, with brown hair streaked with gray and Marcus's eyes staring out from a thin face. "I am looking for Marcus Zimmerman," the woman said quietly. "I was told he lives here." Clara's heart began to pound. She dismissed her students early and walked the woman back to the cabin, where Marcus was working on repairing the roof. When he climbed down and saw who stood beside his wife, he went completely white. "Sarah," he whispered. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little brother." What followed was a tearful reunion, years of separation and worry pouring out in broken explanations and apologies. Sarah had fled west after leaving home, eventually ending up in California, where she had married a merchant and made a life for herself. Her husband had recently died, and with no children of their own, she had decided to try to find her brother, the only family she had left. Marcus introduced her to Clara and his children, and Sarah wept again at the sight of the beautiful family her brother had built. "Mother would be so proud of you," she said, holding Samuel and baby Sarah close. "You found happiness, Marcus, real happiness." "So did you, I hope," Marcus said, studying his sister's face for signs of the trauma he knew she must have endured. "I did," Sarah said honestly. "John was a good man, and he loved me well. We had 20 years together before the fever took him. I regret nothing except losing all those years with you." "You are here now," Clara said warmly, taking her sister-in-law's hand. "You are welcome to stay as long as you like." Family is always welcome. Sarah stayed 3 months, helping with the school and getting to know her nephew and niece. The relationship between the siblings healed slowly, old wounds gradually closing as they rediscovered the connection they had shared as children. When Sarah finally continued her journey, planning to settle in Denver where opportunities for a woman alone were more abundant, it was with promises to visit regularly and with tears from all involved. "You have a beautiful family," Sarah told Marcus before she boarded the train. "That woman of yours, she is special. Hold onto her tight." "Every single day," Marcus promised. The years continued to pass, marked by both joys and sorrows. Thompson died in 1890, leaving Marcus as the sole owner of the ranch through the provisions of his will. Marcus was stunned by the older man's generosity, but honored his memory by running the ranch with the same integrity Thompson had always demonstrated. Clara's school became officially recognized by the territorial government, with Clara appointed as the first female school superintendent in Colorado when it achieved statehood in 1876. She fought tirelessly for better education funding and for the rights of all children to receive quality schooling regardless of their family's financial situation. Samuel grew into a serious young man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's passion for learning. At 18, he left for university in Denver, planning to study law. Sarah, younger by 4 years, was already showing signs of becoming a talented artist, her drawings and paintings covering the walls of the expanded cabin that was now practically a small house. In 1895, Clara found herself pregnant again, much to her and Marcus's surprise. At 40 years old, she had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but the doctor confirmed what her body was telling her. Marcus was simultaneously terrified and elated, worried about Clara's age but thrilled at the prospect of another child. "We are going to be the oldest parents at the school," Clara joked, though she shared his concerns. "We will also be the wisest," Marcus countered, pulling her close and resting his hand on her still flat belly. "This child will be so loved, Clara, just like the others." Their third child, a boy they named Daniel, was born healthy and strong in the spring of 1896. At 43, Marcus found himself waking for midnight feedings and changing diapers again, but he would not have traded it for anything. Watching Clara nurse their son, her face soft with love, he marveled at the life they had built together from such a terrible beginning. "Do you remember that first night?" Clara asked quietly one evening as though reading his thoughts. "When you came to my cabin and cleaned my wounds." "Every detail," Marcus said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, refusing to show weakness even though you must have been in agony." "I remember thinking you must be an angel," Clara said with a slight smile. "No one in this town had shown me any kindness in so long, and then suddenly there you were, this stranger with gentle hands and a good heart." "Not an angel," Marcus said. "Just a man who recognized cruelty when he saw it and could not stand by and do nothing." "My hero," Clara said softly, kissing him tenderly. As the 19th century drew to a close, the Zimmerman family had become pillars of the Fort Collins community. Marcus's ranch was one of the most successful in the region, known for treating workers fairly and paying decent wages. Clara's school had expanded into multiple buildings, educating hundreds of children from all backgrounds. The town itself had grown into a small city, with electricity reaching them in 1898 and talk of paved streets and modern conveniences. The harsh frontier justice that had scarred Clara so terribly seemed like a relic of a barbaric past, though the scars on her back remained as a permanent reminder of how quickly civilization could slip away. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, Marcus took Clara on a trip to Denver, their first real vacation in years. They stayed in a fancy hotel, saw a theatrical production, and dined in restaurants with tablecloths and multiple courses. It was a far cry from their humble beginning, but through it all, they remained the same people at their core. "You miss it?" Clara asked as they stood on the hotel balcony, looking out over the growing city. "The wandering life before you settled down." Marcus pulled her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Not for a single second. That man who drifted from town to town, he was lost. He was hiding from life because he was afraid to really live it. You taught me that the bravest thing anyone can do is choose to love, to commit, to build something lasting even knowing it might hurt if you lose it. We have lost things, Clara said quietly, thinking of friends and family who had passed over the years. But we still have each other. Always, Marcus promised. Until my last breath, Clara. You are mine and I am yours. They returned home to find that Samuel had come back from Denver for a surprise visit, bringing with him a young woman he introduced as his fiancée. Watching their eldest son, now 22 and a practicing lawyer, Clara felt the bittersweet pang of parenthood, pride in who he had become mixed with sadness that her baby had grown up. The wedding took place in the summer of 1900, a beautiful ceremony in the garden behind the Zimmerman house. Sarah, now 18, served as maid of honor, and little Daniel at 5 years old was the ring bearer, taking his job with utmost seriousness. Marcus walked Samuel's bride down the aisle since her own father had passed years before, and Clara watched it all with tears streaming down her face. That night, lying in bed with Marcus, she said, "We did it. We raised good people who are going out into the world and making it better." "We did," Marcus agreed, "but we are not done yet. We still have 2 more to finish raising." Clara laughed, snuggling closer to her husband. Even after 21 years of marriage, she still felt that flutter in her stomach when he held her close, still felt that absolute certainty that he was her person, the other half of her soul. The new century brought changes, some welcome and some less so. Automobiles began appearing on the streets, frightening horses and causing accidents. The school had to adapt its curriculum to prepare students for a rapidly industrializing world. Marcus found himself having to modernize ranch operations to stay competitive, though he never compromised on his principles of fair treatment for workers and ethical animal husbandry. Through it all, the Zimmerman marriage remained strong. They still read together in the evenings, though now it was often with Daniel curled between them, listening to his father's deep voice bringing stories to life. Marcus still brought Clara books, finding increasingly rare volumes to add to her ever-expanding library. And Clara still looked at her husband with the same love and gratitude she had felt that first night when a stranger had shown her unexpected kindness. In 1905, Sarah married a young teacher who had come to work at the school, and the wedding was another joyous occasion. A year later, Samuel and his wife presented Marcus and Clara with their first grandchild, a boy they named Marcus after his grandfather. Holding his tiny namesake, Marcus felt the circle of life completing itself in the most beautiful way. "Your great-grandmother would have loved to see this," he murmured to the baby. 4 generations connected by love and stubborn determination to make the world a little better. Daniel grew into a thoughtful boy with a gift for mathematics and science. At 10 years old, he announced he wanted to be an engineer and build bridges. Clara and Marcus supported his dreams wholeheartedly, already saving money for his eventual university education. One evening in the spring of 1908, Clara found an old wooden box while cleaning out a closet. Inside were the ruined remains of the dress she had been wearing the day of the flogging, carefully preserved though she could not remember saving it. The fabric was stiff with old bloodstains, the back shredded beyond repair. Marcus found her sitting on the floor, the dress in her lap, tears streaming down her face. He sat down beside her without a word, putting his arm around her shoulders. 30 years, Clara said shakily. It has been 30 years since that day, and sometimes it still feels like yesterday. Sometimes I can still feel the lash coming down, still hear Pastor Whitmore's voice condemning me. "I know," Marcus said gently. "Trauma does not fade just because time passes. But Clara, look at what you have built since then." Look at the life we have created, the children we have raised, the students you have taught. He tried to break you, and instead you became stronger, braver, more incredible than he could ever comprehend. Clara leaned into her husband's strength. I would not have survived without you. I truly believe that. You would have, Marcus said firmly. You are the strongest person I know, but I am grateful every day that I was there, that I could help you, that you let me into your life and gave me purpose I had never known before. They burned the dress that evening in the fireplace, watching the old pain literally turn to ash. It felt cleansing, a final letting go of the past's hold. The scars on Clara's back would always remain, but they no longer defined her. She was so much more than what had been done to her. As they prepared for bed that night, Marcus traced the old scars with gentle fingers, the way he had done countless times over the years. You are beautiful, he said quietly. Every part of you, including these marks, they are evidence of your survival, your strength. Clara turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. I love you, Marcus Zimmerman. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Zimmerman, Marcus said, kissing her with the passion and tenderness that had never diminished despite 3 decades together. The years continued their relentless march forward. Samuel became a prominent lawyer in Denver, fighting for the rights of workers and women. Sarah and her husband took over the school when Clara decided to retire at 60. Though she still taught occasional classes, because she could never completely give up the work she loved. Daniel went off to university to study engineering, writing long letters home about his classes and the amazing new technologies being developed. Marcus and Clara, now in their 60s, found themselves alone in their house for the first time in over 30 years. The quiet was strange at first, almost uncomfortable. But they adjusted, rediscovering each other in new ways, enjoying the freedom to be spontaneous and focus entirely on one another. They took more trips, visiting Samuel in Denver, touring the Rocky Mountains, even going as far as California to see the Pacific Ocean. Marcus bought Clara a camera, and she became obsessed with photography, documenting their travels and the changing landscape of the West. In 1915, Daniel graduated with honors from his engineering program and immediately went to work for a firm building infrastructure throughout Colorado. At his graduation, he gave a speech thanking his parents for instilling in him the value of education and the importance of using knowledge to serve others. Clara cried through the entire speech, and Marcus squeezed her hand, both of them bursting with pride. That summer, all 3 of their children came home for a family reunion, bringing spouses and grandchildren. The house was full to bursting with noise and laughter and love. Watching Marcus play with his 5 grandchildren in the yard, Clara felt a peace settle over her that was almost spiritual in its completeness. You look content, Sarah said, coming to stand beside her mother on the porch. I am, Clara said simply. Everything I went through, all the pain and hardship, led me to this moment. I would not change a single thing if it meant I did not have all of you. Dad says he fell in love with you the moment he saw you refuse to break despite the flogging, Sarah said. He says your strength called to something in him that he had thought was dead. Clara smiled, watching her husband lift his youngest grandson onto his shoulders. I fell in love with his gentleness. In a world that had shown me only harshness, his kindness was like water in the desert. I could not help but love him. The family reunion lasted a week, and when everyone finally departed, the house felt empty but in a good way. Marcus and Clara cleaned up together, washing dishes and putting away toys, enjoying the comfortable domesticity they had perfected over 40 years of marriage. That night, They sat on their porch under a blanket of stars, the same way they had done thousands of times before. Marcus had his arm around Clara, and she had her head on his shoulder, both of them content to simply exist in each other's presence. "You know what I think about sometimes," Marcus said quietly. "What is that?" "I think about that cowboy who rode into Fort Collins 40 years ago, planning to stay a week, and then move on. I think about how different his life would have been if he had arrived just a day later, or if he had chosen to ignore what he saw in the town square." Marcus paused, his voice growing thick with emotion. That man had no idea that his entire life was about to change, that he was about to find his reason for existing. "I think about the woman I was before you," Clara said softly. "So angry at the world, so alone. I had convinced myself that I did not need anyone, that I was strong enough to face everything by myself. And then you showed up and proved that accepting help, allowing someone to care for you, is not weakness but wisdom." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the Colorado plains. Crickets chirping, the distant call of an owl, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees Marcus had planted when Samuel was born. "Promise me something," Clara said suddenly. "Anything," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how many years we have left, we will face them together. That we will keep choosing each other every single day the way we have for 40 years. Marcus pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Clara, I promise you with everything I am that I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. You are my home, my heart, my reason for everything. Until my last breath I am yours." The years that followed were gentler than those that had come before. They were grandparents now, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree expand and flourish. Marcus finally retired from active ranch management at 70, though he still consulted and visited regularly. Clara spent her days reading, taking photographs, and writing a memoir about her experiences that would eventually be published and become required reading in schools throughout Colorado. They traveled when they could, saw new places and experienced new things, but they always returned to their home in Fort Collins, to the cabin that had expanded into a comfortable house, to the land that held so many memories. The school Clara had founded continued to thrive under Sarah's leadership, educating generations of children. On a crisp October morning in 1920, Marcus and Clara celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by their entire family. 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren packed into the house and spilled out into the yard. Samuel, now a respected judge, gave a toast to his parents' enduring love. Sarah, her hair starting to gray like her mother's, spoke about the example her parents had set for what marriage should be. Daniel, taking a break from supervising the construction of a major bridge, simply said, "You two are the best people I know." That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Marcus and Clara found themselves alone on their porch again, the same spot where they had shared so many important moments over the decades. Clara was 73 now, her hair completely white, her face lined with years of laughter and tears. Marcus at 76 moved a bit slower than he once had, his joints stiff from decades of hard work, but his eyes still held the same love and gentleness that had first drawn Clara to him. 50 years, Clara said wonderingly. Half a century with you. Best 50 years of my life, Marcus said, pulling her close. You know what the most amazing thing is? I love you even more now than I did on our wedding day. Every year, every day, every moment with you has just added layers to what I feel. I know exactly what you mean, Clara said. Sometimes I look at you and I am overwhelmed by how lucky I am, that out of all the places you could have been, All the paths you could have taken. You were exactly where I needed you to be at exactly the right moment. I do not think it was luck, Marcus said thoughtfully. I think it was fate. I think we were always meant to find each other, to save each other, to build this beautiful life together. They sat wrapped in each other's arms as the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their love story so many years ago. They had survived brutality and prejudice, had built a family from nothing but determination and love, had watched the world transform around them while their devotion to each other remained constant. I am not ready for this to end, Clara whispered, voicing the fear they both carried as they aged. I want more time with you, decades more. Then we will have decades more, Marcus said firmly. We are both stubborn enough to live to be 100 out of pure spite. Clara laughed, the sound still bright and free even after all these years. I love your optimism. I love everything about you, Marcus said simply. Every single thing without exception. They continued to live fully, refusing to let age slow them down any more than necessary. They attended grandchildren's weddings and great-grandchildren's baptisms, traveled to Samuel's swearing in as a state Supreme Court justice, celebrated Sarah's art being displayed in a Denver gallery, and visited Daniel's bridges spanning rivers and gorges throughout the West. In the winter of 1925, Clara caught pneumonia. For 2 terrifying weeks, Marcus barely left her side, holding her hand through fevers and chills, reading to her when she was conscious enough to listen. The entire family gathered, fearing the worst, but Clara's stubborn will pulled her through. When she finally opened her eyes clear of fever, the first thing she saw was Marcus's face, haggard with worry and sleeplessness. "You look terrible," she rasped, her voice weak but her eyes twinkling with humor. "You scared 10 years off my life," Marcus said, his relief so profound he could barely speak. "Do not ever do that to me again." "I promised you decades," Clara said. "I keep my promises." She recovered slowly but completely, and by spring she was back to her normal activities, though perhaps moving a bit more carefully. The scare had reminded them both that their time was finite, precious, not to be wasted. They made a point of saying "I love you" every single day, multiple times a day. They held hands whenever they walked anywhere. They kissed good night and good morning without fail. They continued to read together, to talk about ideas and current events, to debate and discuss and share their thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. On a warm evening in June 1928, as they celebrated Marcus's 84th birthday surrounded by family, Clara looked around at the faces of their descendants and felt overwhelming gratitude. They had created this. All these people who existed because she and Marcus had found each other, had chosen each other, had built a life based on love and mutual respect. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Marcus pulled Clara into his arms and held her close. At 81, she was still beautiful to him, still the brave woman who had refused to be broken by cruelty, still the love of his life. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Clara asked, looking up at him. "For marrying me. For building this life with me. For giving me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. For teaching me what love really means. For every single day of the past 50 years. Marcus paused, emotion making his voice rough. "For being you exactly as you are without compromise or apology." Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Thank you for cleaning my wounds and bringing me books. Thank you for seeing me when the rest of the world wanted me invisible. Thank you for loving me so completely that I never doubted it for even a moment." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for being my home, Marcus Zimmerman." They continued on together, 2 souls intertwined so completely that one could not imagine existence without the other. They watched the world change in ways they could never have imagined in their youth. Automobiles becoming commonplace, electricity reaching even remote areas, women gaining the right to vote, technology advancing at a dizzying pace. Through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They were living proof that even in the harshest circumstances, beauty could bloom, that courage and kindness could triumph over cruelty. That love, real and true and lasting, was not just possible but worth fighting for with everything you had. On their 60th wedding anniversary in 1930, unable to host the large gathering due to their advancing age, they celebrated quietly with just their immediate children and a few of the older grandchildren. Samuel, now 64 himself, raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying the weight of emotion. "You taught us what it means to love without conditions, to stand firm in your principles even when it costs you everything, to build rather than destroy. The world is better because you two found each other." Marcus and Clara smiled at their son, at each other, at the life they had built from those dark beginnings 52 years ago. They had lived long and lived well, had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. They had created a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lifetimes, influencing generations not yet born. As the evening wound down and their children finally left them alone, Marcus and Clara found themselves on their porch one last time, wrapped in blankets against the cool mountain air. They sat in the same rocking chairs they had occupied for decades, holding hands in the space between them. "I would do it all again," Clara said quietly. "Every single moment, even the painful ones, because they led me to you. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you refuse to break," Marcus said, repeating what he had told her so many times over the years. "And I have fallen deeper in love with you every day since." They sat together watching the stars, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, that had shone down on their wedding night, that had seen them raise their children and build their legacy. And in that perfect moment, two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from violence and pain, who had proven that love could conquer even the darkest circumstances, simply existed together in complete peace. The years ahead would bring more challenges, more joy, more moments both mundane and profound. But whatever came, they would face it together, just as they always had, just as they had promised each other all those decades ago. Marcus and Clara Zimmerman, forever bound by love that had begun with an act of kindness and had grown into something eternal, something that would echo through generations, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of love, courage, and unwavering devotion. Their story, which began with forbidden books and blood-stained bandages, ended exactly as it should have, with two people who had chosen each other every single day, who had built a life of meaning and purpose, who had loved so completely that even death, when it eventually came for them within months of each other in their 91st and 88th years respectively, could not diminish what they had created together. Their legacy lived on in their descendants, in the school that still bore Clara's influence, in the land Marcus had tended so carefully, and in the countless lives they had touched with their example of what true love, enduring and unconditional, could accomplish against any odds.